On a freezing evening, when the city lights glowed against the dark streets, a thin homeless girl stood outside a cafe, shivering in her worn coat, clutching her empty stomach as the smell of warm food drifted through the door every time it opened. Inside, the cafe was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of cups, a world so far from hers that she almost felt invisible standing there. Yet hunger pushed her to gather courage she didn't know she still had. With hesitant steps, she walked inside, her eyes lowered, her voice trembling as she asked, "Can I play for food?" For a moment there was silence, then the room erupted in laughter. Not the kind that warms hearts, but the sharp laughter of disbelief and mockery. Some people whispered that she was only looking for sympathy, others smirked at the thought of a ragged girl touching the piano in the corner of the cafe. They assumed she was just another desperate soul, trying to trick them for a meal. The girl felt the sting of their words, but instead of shrinking back, she stood straighter, her pale face firm, her eyes filled with something stronger than fear. She glanced at the piano, its polished surface reflecting the warm glow of the lights, and in that moment, she made a decision. She would not beg, she would not plead. She would show them what she carried within. Her small hands trembled as she moved closer to the instrument, the crowd watching her every step with mocking smiles, whispering that this would be another laugh, another story to tell later. Yet she did not turn away. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, feeling the cold touch of the ivory, and took a deep breath. The cafe grew quieter, curiosity mixing with ridicule, as they waited for her to embarrass herself. No one believed she could play a single proper note, but the girl knew something they did not, that the piano was her only voice. The only way she could speak the story her lips never had the chance to tell. With the weight of hunger in her body, and the heavier weight of judgment on her shoulders, she prepared to play, and in that tense silence, the room seemed to hold its breath, not realizing that the laughter which had filled the air only moments before was about to be replaced by something entirely unexpected. With shaky hands and a heart pounding so loudly she thought everyone could hear it, the girl slid onto the wooden piano bench, her thin frame almost swallowed by the size of the instrument before her. The cafe was still buzzing with laughter, some customers covering their smirks with their hands, others whispering as if waiting for a disaster to unfold. She lowered her gaze, trying to shut out the stares burning into her, and let her fingers hover over the keys. For a moment, she froze, wondering if she had made a mistake. If maybe they were right, and she was just a foolish homeless girl, reaching for something too far from her grasp. Then hunger reminded her why she was there, and courage reminded her that music had always been her only shield against the world. With one deep breath, she pressed a single key. The sound that followed was clear, soft, almost fragile, yet it carried something raw that sliced through the noise of the cafe. It was not a clumsy sound. It was not the stumble they expected. It was pure, and though it was just one note, it held a weight none of them could laugh at. A few chuckles lingered, but her hands began to move again, pressing another key, then another, stringing together a fragile melody. At first, the rhythm was uneven, her nerves fighting against her skill, but soon, instinct took over. The music, that had lived inside her, hidden and ignored by the world, began to flow through her fingers, as if the piano had been waiting for her all along. Slowly, the cafe's noise softened. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence, laughter choked into silence, and heads began to turn toward the small figure on the bench. Her music rose, no longer hesitant, but filled with emotion, sorrow, hope, hunger, and dreams, all woven into notes that shimmered through the air. Each keystroke was like a heartbeat, steadying itself, growing stronger with every moment. The mockery that had filled the room only minutes ago was replaced by something heavier, something that held the room still. People who had been laughing now found themselves staring, caught by the honesty in the sound. She did not look up at them, did not need to. The piano became her world, and through it, she spoke of every night she had slept on cold stone streets, every day she had walked past food she could not afford, every dream she had kept alive despite the weight of rejection. The notes carried her story more clearly than words ever could. Some listeners felt their chests tighten without understanding why. Others leaned forward, their drinks forgotten, their smiles gone. With every passing second, her confidence grew, and her fingers moved faster, dancing across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so young and so broken by life. The cafe, once filled with careless noise, was now drenched in silence, except for the song echoing through it, each note sharp and alive, demanding to be felt. Even those who had mocked her the loudest now sat still, their eyes wide, as if trying to grasp how this fragile girl had turned their jeers into awe. The owner of the cafe, who had once considered chasing her out, leaned against the counter, unable to move, because the truth of her gift had struck him harder than any argument could. And as the music grew, filling every corner of the room, the girl forgot the hunger in her stomach and the weight of her ragged clothes. In that moment, she was not a beggar, not a stranger, not the subject of cruel laughter. She was a musician, a voice, a soul, unbroken by the world. Each note was no longer just sound. It was a plea, a challenge, a revelation. And as her fingers flew over the keys, the cafe that had mocked her sat in stunned silence, listening to the beginning of something they had never expected, realizing with each rising chord that they had laughed too soon. As the girl's small fingers glided over the keys, something inside the cafe began to change, though no one could explain it at first. The laughter that had filled the air only moments ago started to fade, replaced by a deep silence, as if every soul in the room had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. People leaned in closer, their cups of coffee cooling in their hands, their eyes fixed on the thin, tired figure who had walked in from the cold streets. A girl they had mocked without mercy only minutes before, and yet now they could not look away, because each note she played carried something raw and undeniable, something that struck straight at the heart. It wasn't just music, it was a story being told without words, a story of hunger that had pressed her bones against her skin, of nights when she had no bed but the hard ground, of loneliness that wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, and yet within those same notes there was also hope, fragile but real, like a candle refusing to be blown out by the harsh winds of the world. The crowd found themselves gripped by emotions they hadn't expected. Some felt tears burning in their eyes, though they didn't even know why. Others clenched their hands tightly on their tables, as though holding on to something precious, and even those who had laughed the loudest now sat frozen, ashamed of their own voices, because the sound of her music seemed to rise above their cruelty and wash it away. The cafe itself appeared to transform under her touch. The clinking of cups slowed, the whispers quieted, and even the old wooden walls seemed to hum with the vibration of her playing, turning the entire place into a stage for a performance no one had asked for, but everyone needed. Suspense filled the air, because each new note felt like a step into the unknown, carrying the listeners deeper into her world, a world they had never seen but now could feel. And as she leaned closer to the piano, her face calm but her eyes carrying years of silent battles, the audience realized they were no longer looking at a poor homeless girl begging for food, but at an artist, a prodigy, someone whose spirit could not be broken by hardship. The music climbed higher, filling the corners of the cafe like a rising tide, then fell into softer tones that made hearts ache, and with every shift, the people followed her, powerless to resist. It was as if time had stopped, as if the cold night outside did not exist, as if the only truth in the world was the sound of her hands shaping emotions into music. And in that suspended moment, every person in the cafe understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would stay with them forever. When the final note drifted into the air, it seemed to hang there, trembling like a fragile star refusing to die out. And for a long moment the cafe was frozen in complete silence. No clinking of spoons, No shuffling of feet, no whisper of voices, only the echo of her music lingering in the minds of everyone present. And then, slowly, as though the spell had been broken by the sheer weight of what they had witnessed, hands began to come together, softly at first, hesitant, as if the crowd feared that clapping would shatter the magic she had created, but then louder and louder until the cafe roared with applause, a sound greater and more sincere than the mocking laughter that had greeted her only moments before. And in that wave of clapping, the girl stood still, her fragile frame illuminated by the warm cafe lights, her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath, her eyes wide not with pride but with quiet disbelief, as if she could not quite understand how quickly the world around her had shifted. People who had mocked her hunger now looked at her with awe, their faces softened by wonder, their eyes reflecting a respect they had not thought themselves capable of showing to a girl they had dismissed as nothing. And it was in that silence between claps that a man stepped forward, not with arrogance or pity, but with genuine reverence, asking her name in a voice that carried both curiosity and kindness, his words breaking the invisible wall that had always kept her apart from the world. And when she whispered her answer, it felt like the cafe itself leaned closer to hear, because her voice, though quiet, now carried the weight of her music. The man, touched by something he could not put into words, offered her not only a meal, but a promise, an invitation to return the next day and play again. His simple gesture sparking whispers of excitement among the crowd, for they all knew they wanted more of the magic she had given them. And as the scent of warm food reached her, her eyes glistened, not only from hunger but from the shock of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in what felt like forever. And in that moment, she no longer stood at the margins of their lives, but in the very center of their respect, her presence transforming the room into something sacred, as though they had all taken part in a secret revelation. And the suspense of what would come next seemed to cling to the air, because everyone knew the world outside was still cold and unforgiving, but here, inside these walls, a door had opened, and the girl who had walked in invisible now stood tall, not because she had been given kindness, but because she had earned admiration through her gift, her pain, and her courage, and the people around her silently promised themselves that they would never again forget the night the laughter ended and recognition began.